If I take the current generation of gamers and I put a console in front of them that they are familiar with, and I give them all the tools, I still give them the requirement to fight the tank, but I give them a different technical execution, then how do they go about that business? So you'll hear me reference coming back to the crew in each one of these. Because of reduced crew, now you get into how do you do maintenance, how do you do local security, how do you answer all those questions. But the tank crew in and of itself isn't isolated on the battlefield. So now with modern tools, better connectivity, integrated as part of a combined arms formation, let's go answer the fundamental questions to make it.
Greetings all. I try to take a bit of pride in what I do, to the extent that I took a couple of days vacation time, flew up to Detroit, and tried to get the most detailed information I could instead of just looking at photos on the internet and musing with less context. The Army has decided to make the tank public, so why not take advantage of the opportunity to settle some things before speculation runs rampant. The majority of this video is an interview with Colonel Howell. He is the chap you just saw speaking. However, he was a very busy man. The PAO was shuffling him from one interview to another, and we did not have enough time to get through everything. When time allows, we hope to re-engage in a more relaxed atmosphere. But again, we have this whole battle of first truth thing, that speculation will drown out facts due to the advantage of time. So this interview goes out now. There was a whole bunch of folks present, from the very top of PEO-GCS through PM Abrams and the engineers, and so I also had the opportunity to get a bit more background information for questions that I did not have time to ask. So, in a moment I'll kick it to the recorded footage, and then I'll come back and do a bit of reading between the lines and talking about possible conclusions from what has been said publicly. There is a lot more to this tank than I think people are understanding. As a side note, in my haste to get set up in a sudden moment of availability because one interviewer cancelled and shuffled around whatever, I knocked my camera off the tripod, which broke the motors, hence the focus is a little bit fuzzy. But the audio and info is good. This also means that in addition to the flight, hotel and vacation time, this trip also cost me a $1,200 camera, and YouTube ad revenue is not going to remotely cover this. Thus, I would remind people that there is the possibility of supporting my work financially through Patreon, PayPal, or YouTube donations so that I can keep bringing more better information. Links in the video description below if you choose to do so. If not, if you can at least subscribe to the channel, I may find benefits there. And if nothing else, surely you want to be notified of further video releases. Anyway, to Detroit. So it's not just a tank that is at the Detroit Auto Show. Recruiting Commander here as well, and they got themselves a couple of ISVs and an SMET. Let me turn this around. ISV. Canvas seats. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 1 9-man squad. No room for the medic. I guess he's going to go in the platoon leader's vehicle. And they got a cargo variant. Of interest, they seem to have covered the dash for some reason. I would assume it's considered restricted or something. Because Lord knows I can't imagine why you would cover the dash in what is basically a Chevrolet pickup truck. And the latest and greatest estimate. Like the winch at the front. So that said, there is a tank around here somewhere. I just have to find it. Well, in fairness, I also want to have a look at the new Cadillacs. Well, if you want to find a tank at an auto show, you need to hunt a little bit. I've had to come to the basement. Not only that, I've had to go to a far corner of a basement, surrounded by, well, a number of very nice cars. Florida Patrol. But eventually, if you walk around for long enough, you see a black curtain in a corner. You have to think, for one of the most expensive vehicles on this floor, or in fact in the entire show, It would have given it pride of place, but I guess one of the problems was if the thing comes in at 60-something ton, you can't put it upstairs. Eventually, however, you find a tank. Greetings all, I am at the Detroit Auto Show and there has been the great public reveal of the M1E3 type vehicle. Standing next to me is COL Howell. He is, your integration?
Director of Integration for CPE Ground.
I should have learned that by heart. It's professional failing on my part. I apologize. Okay, so I have a battery of questions on this new vehicle that has been, you teased it initially. We knew this was going to happen eventually, but what has actually been displayed here? Because it doesn't look like a final product.
No, it's not the final product. This is an M1E3 early prototype tech demonstrator. The focus is on the crew. And the question that fundamentally has to be answered is how do you fight this with a reduced crew with digital tools that we haven't had before in the modern environment? And that's what this vehicle is going to help inform as we actually build the prototypes.
So a while back there was the public announcement that said, okay, the Army is going away from Step V4 and is now moving to M1E3. Why did this decision happen? What was going through the Army's mind?
There wasn't enough bang for the buck on the investment, right? It was largely in the right mind it was the pathway that was correct for the technology, but we still had the fundamental challenges of the existing tank. It's very heavy. You had the introduction of drones as a threat, although at the time the decision was made, those weren't as prevalent. And so how do you deal with that, and then how do you better incorporate all the new digital tools that are coming around? It's not so much the digital tools of the platform, but cloud computing. Everyone speaks to AI and what it could do, whether it's target detection, recognition, could be driving tools, software, more commerciality. So the prior program didn't address anything that is now in the forefront of what the Secretary and the Chief have us do. So the program was then paused and then terminated, and then a direction change in order to get after those objectives.
So you're talking about the software. Obviously, people looking at photographs, they're immediately going to look at the form factors. You got a lot of crew in a turret.
Right.
It occurs to me, though, that most of the big differentiators for a modern tank are actually going to be the software, the things that you can't see from the outside.
That's right.
How much of that has been implemented thus far? How much can you talk about?
No, we can talk about it, in a philosophical context. The exact ones and zeros, we'd have to go get SMEs and all of that stuff. But that's why I said this focus is, because that's an unmanned turret that you see behind you, right? Now, does it have everything that we want in the final product? No, but it doesn't require a crew in order to operate the turret. It requires a crew to operate the tank. And so that's part of the philosophical change. If I take the current generation of gamers and I put a console in front of them that they are familiar with, and I give them all the tools, I still give them the requirement to fight the tank, but I give them a different technical execution, then how do they go about that business? So you'll hear me reference coming back to the crew in each one of these. Because a reduced crew, now you get into how do you do maintenance, how do you do local security, how do you answer all those questions. But the tank crew in and of itself isn't isolated on the battlefield. So now with modern tools, better connectivity, integrated as part of a combined arms formation, let's go answer the fundamental questions to make it. Because right now the modeling tools for these kinds of things, they don't exist, and it's kind of a chicken and the egg. Do you wait to model it? Do you go put it out there? It's a little bit of both. You model as much as you can, and then the digits on this. So as an example, we focused heavily on what does the software need to do and how much open source or commercial standards really is what it gets after. So instead of bespoke military standards, no, we're using commercial code on this, right? Ultimately, you have to. Pick your operating system, it doesn't matter. So then the stations themselves are focused on how do I give a rich user experience that an 18-year-old today that's been playing games in War Thunder and Halo, Call of Duty, take it. How can they then take that experience, put that on this platform, and now you fight with that type of a philosophy going forward?
So you mentioned issues of sustainment and radio watch and so on. Because the public discussion is, you need 4 people to do that. Well, I'll manage it with 3 in a Bradley. But I found a lovely thing in the archives, and I'll put it down at the bottom. It says, there was great reluctance amongst the crews to go from 5 tank crewmen to 4 tank crewmen.
That's right.
And the arguments were not on his combat capability, but because of all the ancillary tasks. And it says, the volume that he takes up inside is not worth it for the tank's capability.
Right.
And I'm assuming it's the same here.
It is the same. Right. So I'll speak to history, right?
Yeah.
So Da Vinci knew and documented flight. He just didn't have the tools and the technology.
Right.
You go back in the 80s, they had the debates back then on how do you do a reduced crew under the tank test bed.
With the TDB, yes.
Well, yeah, so they had the right vision. They didn't have the right technology. It wasn't modern. They weren't thinking about connectivity. They didn't have, cloud computing wasn't a thing. It probably wasn't even on anyone's horizon, right? So we have other means to achieve what they had the vision for. So somebody prior to us thought about, okay, how do you fight 3 and what does it look like in a formation?
Were you able to take any lessons from the TTB program, or are you just basically clean slate? That was an interesting thing that they tried.
No, you go back and you look at the history and you study what they did and tried. So everything from you need a reliable autoloader, right? That has to occur. That's going to occur with this one too. So does this one have an autoloader? Yeah, it's got an autoloader. Is it going to be reliable? It's going to be reliable in order to do what this tank needs to do, and then we're going to keep improving reliability. So you burn out all the things that they did. So it's the same philosophical context that they had. Again, different style of autoloader, different contextual relationship, modern manufacturing, all those things. Yep. So we attack the same problem set. So it's very much worthwhile to read and know and understand the history, but there's a limitation on, okay, they were bound by the technology of their time. We are beyond that. So now we can pick up with a tool set that they didn't have in order to advance what the tank does.
So on the matter of technology, so when the Army made the decision, we are going to go from V4 to E3, which is a fairly major course correction, it implies that you'd already done a lot of research on this before going, yes, we want to, otherwise it would have been a huge leap of faith.
Right.
So how long has this program been going on?
So I go all the way. You mentioned, we talk about the tank test bed, right?
Yeah.
There have been lessons and studies, and it's everything from material advancement. So like some of the technologies we're looking at, like on, okay, how do you make lightweight track and road wheels? It goes all the way back to the 50s. As I always like to say, the science is not new. The question is whether you can produce some of these things at a cost, quantity, and volume that make it affordable now.
Okay.
So have the labs been working with, crew station configuration they have for the last 20 years? So the latest body of work that they've done like on that, so we picked up going, okay, we're at a point where this is now usable. The Caterpillar engine that's sitting over there that General Dynamics selected as part of their down select, diesel technology's made the advancement. So is it necessarily investment that the Army has made? No. Commercial industry has made most of the advancements in the technologies that make the E3 now possible. Mm-hmm. So whether it's an engine or computing and processing or camera technology, all of that comes out of a commercial sector. So we leverage what you can buy, not necessarily what the Army's necessarily created.
So the turbine has gone away. We're not going to be able to warm our hands behind the tank anymore?
No, sorry, that one's gone. Yep, that's right. I know. But it's a huge, that one in particular. Yeah. Fuel efficiency, reliability, cost. Diesels are infinitely cheaper than a turbine engine. And so as we go through this, that was the other thing that we looked at, is like, how do you make this not just better, raw capability, but how do you make it so that the tank is more sustainable and that the price point for affordability and sustainment is less than it is today? That was a lot of what went into, is diesel technology ready? And I'm using ready as, it's not simply power output at the shaft that matters.
So if you're looking at overall at the program, you're going to get a new turret whip mechanism, you're getting a new powertrain mechanism, you've got a new crew configuration. Now I go back to the early M1 days, they had a vision at the very beginning, which was basically M1E2. Yes. But you started off, we don't really have the money right now for the 120, so we'll start with a 105 with a plan to upgrade. Or we'll start with the CITV, there's that mount on the A1, it's actually up there, actually, you put the thing on there. Yeah. But in the future, so is there an option to do this? Is it a come as you are full package, or can you go, we're happy with the turret, we'll put the powertrain in later, or are you just doing everything at once?
No, most of the changes there, I'll say small individually, but we've done a lot of the risk reduction. So like, I'll speak to powertrain, right? Okay. We looked at multiple vendors, multiple transmissions and configurations. We are comfortable with the risk. And then we constrained it by the box that you see behind us. We're like, nope, goes in the same space.
Yeah, same hull.
Same hull, same box, same final drives, all of those components, right? So you put the same set of constraints on it. And the reason we didn't want to go, say, clean sheet, if you let engineers run wild, speaking of cost and schedule and risk, it will become unwieldy. So you have to draw certain subsystem constraints. So that's how we went about doing this. That's why this one is configured the way that it is. You keep the things that work. The 120 and the ammunition that comes with it and the gun, they work. They work really well. So why change something that's not broken? So when we went around, and I'll use track suspension since we're sitting right on top of it, we revisited an older track design, but we applied modern design tools. So back in the 70s and 80s, that's was that the 156 track? But we went in with simple finite element, not rocket science, not anything fancy, but okay, give me an optimization. So we worked with a couple of subcontractors that gave us different designs, and we were able to go, you know what, at the weight class that we're targeting, we can pull a ton out of the vehicle. So how do you get it after the weight reduction? And it's simple things. Keep everything as simple as you can, knowing full well the complexity will come, but you don't want to put too many complex things together that otherwise your probability of success goes to zero.
So when you reconfigure the front end, I'm assuming the fuel cells are gone. There's enough space for 3 guys. Otherwise, you didn't have to do anything.
The tank test bed pointed it at us, right?
Yeah. Yep. Torsion bars still, or have you gone to hydrogas? I mean,
nope.
Hooker went.
Yep. Nope. We right. So you use technology you can buy, right? So that's the other thing too. We didn't want to invent anything new.
Yeah.
Right. So we use external suspension units, and that's what's on this one right behind you as well. You can't see it, but the torsion bars are gone because you need the space, right? In order to make, like as an example, I always come back to the powertrain. It's by itself on the current tank is a subsystem. It's always the single most expensive element. The engine and transmission are not cheap. That stated, you have to be able to package in that space. So the torsion bars had to come out in order to make diesel technology work. Or rather, there are engines that could fit in there with a torsion bar, but the challenge then becomes is you limit your choices in what is available from industry in a commercial space.
So speaking of the commercial entities, so the name Roush,
which
yep. I think Ford Mustangs, but
that's right.
Apparently they do tanks.
They have a defense unit, right, and so we worked with them because they had the right team of engineers that could think differently about the problem set.
So is the design of E3 an Army design, a Roush design, a GDLS design, or is it just everybody's talking with everybody else?
So if you start historically, you start with the tank that you know, which is a GDLS product, right? So the hull and the turret that you see here, those are GDLS inputs. The gun design is a derivative going all the way back to Rheinmetall, but now it's a US government design. Roush did our control stations and a lot of the control architecture and software, that's their input. And they did it with direction and inputs from the Army. So it depends on what angle you want to ask the question from. So I like to think of it better as we had the right team, and you had a team that had the right open-minded philosophy, because what you can't do is come in and say, well, we're going to do all these things. People have to be open-minded to the facts. And so as we went through design and design trades, we had the right engineers that could holistically open their mind going, okay, I understand and see that position, and if we change a direction on any design decision, these are the changes that have to be made to any other subsystems. And so it was a good exercise in making sure we had people that could think correctly, more so than I have one person in charge and thou shalt and away you go.
So a lot of the public discourse came out after Abrams X was released that M1E3 is basically going to be Abrams X. Is there actually a connection, or are they just convergent evolution?
No, that was an evolution. Again, you go back to tank test bed, right? You evolve that onto the current platform. It's not that GD necessarily went about it correctly, but they didn't have all of the options that we had on the government. And some of the things, like people talk about the lightweight XM, what was the gun on that thing, 360 or whatever it was, right? But that, so like as an example, the reason we didn't want to go that route is that gun is not finished development, right?
Okay.
And there's a limitation on what that gun can and cannot do. So rather than spend a lot of money on a gun program, we wanted to eliminate any new variables in the equation, and that's where it's like, the 256 is a good gun tube. And what we've learned out of Ukraine is it's got more than enough lethality right now for what the Army needs.
Okay.
So do we need to change something, again, something that works? So we didn't want to do that. It's in production, you can get it. That's the other thing too, is when you go into an activity like this, I always get worried about doing bespoke, unique one-offs, because maintenance is going to come up and bite us. And so the readily available component parts you want more of, therefore you try to stay with what you know, what you can get. So a 256 is a lot easier to come by than an XM360.
I'm assuming that, though, that the turret design is such that if you wanted to upgrade it to a 361, whatever it is, or a 130 or a 140, it could be done.
So I'll speak to maintenance and sustainment.
Okay.
Simple change that we're doing on the turret going forward. It's not that the gun is necessarily going to change. We're doing that, but we're changing how the pins are oriented so that we can actually pull the whole gun with the breech out the front, right? So other countries are able to do that. Right now, you got to take, what is it, the breech block has to go up through the loader's hatch.
Winch and,
Exactly, what a pain.
You're putting your feet in your hands, as it were. Oops, drop the breech block, ow.
So simple changes like that where they make the most sense and you can get the maximum return on a design investment, those things matter more. So we had a fair amount of debate about how much do we want to invest? Do we have an eye towards the future? Whatever upgrade, could you go to an XM360 in the future? Sure.
Yeah.
But now I decouple that risk from the rest of the tank. So we're going to flip, it's a design change on the rotor to change the pin design while we're in the process of reevaluating how you install the gun, but I'm not touching the gun itself, which simplifies the number of variables you have to change to make it work.
With reconfigure, are you allowed to state what the weight goal is? How many tons you're looking to shave off?
Yeah, it's been out in public before.
Oh,
We're going down to 60.
60?
Right.
And that's all up with the APS, with an RWS, drone protection, the works.
That's right. Is it possible? Yes. Again, technologies that we had. So you mentioned APS, right? They didn't have that as an option back in the day, right? Even when the SEP V3, which is now in production, and we bought Trophy afterwards, right? That was not an original thought process.
No.
The difference though, and I'll use Trophy on the current tank, it was an installation more so than an integration.
Right.
So when you take
a ton and a half of dead weight or something. Just
right. So if you took just that approach and you said, okay, if I could do a proper integration, right, and you were willing to, okay, I'm going to go back to Lyman, the production line, and do all that, you could probably save a lot of that weight because you took time to do a full integration of that subsystem. So a lot of the weight savings now is you take all of the add-ons that we've done over the years, and you just take your time with a good systems engineering plan and you go through proper integration. That's where most of the weight savings comes from. It's not magical.
So I was at a engineering conference maybe even 2 years ago, and I think it was actually General Dean at the time said, hey, who here does not think we can go down to a two-man crew? And nobody raised their hand. Everybody said it would theoretically be possible. And there was another comment along the lines of we're going to get away from the mindset of a TC driver gunner, and instead it'll be crewman 1, crewman 2, crewman 3 doing whatever is appropriate at the time. Are we heading in that direction?
So we are and we aren't, right? So where we are is we're making the tank so that going back to software and controls, depending on how the user community wants to set it up, we will be agnostic to the location of the function that they want to assign to it. And maybe they still retain a driver, a gunner, a commander, or whatever the case, because obviously the loader is no longer required. However, as we go through this journey together and we learn, the young soldiers will tell us this is how they want to define the new roles.
Okay.
So we're going to let them set the stage for what it needs to be. And then for, I'll say, ECPs now, the first ones I expect to do on this platform have nothing to do with hardware. It has everything to do with software and configuration. So to answer that question then becomes a matter of what functions does that particular station and operator need to do? How does the user community want to codify that in their training, in their doctrine? And then we will let them set that. So if they go to a classic role, maybe it's modified, that will be them to determine. That's why we built this early prototype, so that we can put it in the hands of soldiers.
In theory, any station can perform any function.
That's right. So General Dean always had a philosophy with me. He said, Ryan, you need to be able to operate the tank with 1, you need to fight it with 2, and then you need to be able to do mission command with 3. Now, who's sitting where and what you have on the screen, that's all up for debate. But that was the philosophy that we entered in when we started down this path.
So mission command, that means like the PL. So in theory, you could have the PL tank with 3, and you could have a wing tank operating capably with 2.
It all depends on how comfortable the user community is. So, and we all know this, right? So if you start with 3, someone's going to go on emergency leave, right?
Goes back to the 5-man tank platoons we had in the 80s.
Right.
Which the bean counters did not like.
Right.
But the commanders loved it because they always had full-on
5 minutes,
crews.
okay.
Okay, in that case, I will get to a couple of really.
Why has the Army decided to publicly display the tank in this new configuration right now?
So as we get ready to roll this out, right, one, soldiers are going to see it, they're going to know it, they're going to want to talk about it. And we want to make sure that we're not trying to hide anything, because at some point you're not going to be able to hide this to begin with. And to be able to show that the progress is more than PowerPoint deep, right? So we actually have real usable assets that we're going to put in front of our soldiers. And then the other thing for being here at the auto show, because of the rich history of this city, knowing that somebody in this town can go all the way back to World War II and they've got family or friends of family or whatever the case may be.
A DTA or something.
Yeah, exactly, and you go back to the tank plant is still here, the building is physically there, right? It's long since been sold, but there is a good history here. So showing the public at the Detroit Auto Show to be able to say, yes, this is what your family or your friends of family have worked on over the years. And then this is a return to the taxpayer. Ultimately, it comes down to this is your investment as a private citizen as to what the investment in the Army is doing. And to also let everyone know that we understand what the limitations of the tank was, the threats that didn't exist last century that exist now. So when we speak to drones, there's a reason that RWS is up there.
Okay.
That thing can hunt and kill on its own. We know that it can. Still needs a user, but it can address the threat of the current environment. And the challenge then is to make sure that everyone understands this is still the apex predator on the battlefield. That was General Rainey's guidance to me and to then what was the CFT at the time, to make sure that this remains the relevant heavyweight on the battlefield, so that at a time and place of the United States choosing, it remains the dominant player in the field of battle.
So I'm going to finish off then with two reasonably important questions. First question, historically when the Army has done a major engineering change, like you change the transmission from M26, you get M46, change the turret, it's M47. Change the turret from M10, you get M36. Why is it still an M1 and not an M something else?
Requirements are the same.
Okay.
The hull's the same, the gun's the same, the ammo's the same, most of the protection scheme is the same. It's simply a different technical execution to what General Starr had laid out in the 70s. They did the requirements right back then. And fundamentally, a tank at the end of the day is still a tank. It needs armor, needs mobility, needs lethality, needs protection. And so those fundamentals, regardless of your technical execution, don't change. So do we really have a new requirement per se? No, I know, again, I like powertrain, because that one, just from a cost driver and sustainment, is hard. We've always looked at diesel technology. Now we have it. So the technical execution on how we approach mobility has changed. But it doesn't change the fundamental requirement of how many miles I need the tank to go, the acceleration, the braking, all those other pieces. So from that performance perspective, that performance envelope remains. We're just going about how we get there in a different manner.
So last question on an important piece of equipment. Are you going to put the mounted ration heater back in? Because I missed that in my M1. They stopped putting it in about 2008. It's kind of like, I got all these English, oh, we got a coffee maker in our tank. Yeah, we used to as well in the M1.
So I don't know if it'll make the final cut sheet as General Dynamics does its final down selects, but like in this one, we put in 110 outlets, knowing full well they're going to charge, well, and at a minimum, right, so I go back to mission command. The platoon leader is going to have to answer email and do op wards and all that other stuff. And we're trying to figure out is like, does that, integration, it's like, do you want that on the screen?
Or is it going to be a laptop?
Right, and that's part of the discussion. So for the moment, if they got to bring their laptop or something else, or you want to bring a coffee pot, it's like, okay, make sure I got enough power that you can plug it into the 110 outlet.
The Army is thinking about the soldier.
Yes. And we have, in this one, we have cup holders big enough to hold a big Gatorade bottle.
You're joking, there are actually cup holders?
No, there are actually cup holders in it, yeah.
Hallelujah!
Yeah. Simple, so when you talk about what is new and different, we're paying attention to the simple details, because they got to live in this thing. Yeah. And so we want to make sure that we have, I'll say enough creature comforts, right? Mm-hmm. The comfort of the seat, how with the seating position. We are paying attention to the human factors. So,
you're still going to put the bustle rack on the back, right?
Yeah, eventually we will. Yeah. Oh yeah, there's a lot of kit. This one's a little bit cleaned up, but yes.
Fair enough. All right, well, we are out of time. Oddly enough, Colonel Howell is a very busy man here at the Detroit Auto Show. I hope to take up the conversation again at some point in the future, but wanted to get this one out right now and put out some message. So, Colonel Howell, sir, thank you very much. I appreciate the time.
I appreciate it. Thanks.
And welcome back. So, all right, as you can see, I had to skip a little bit, and there is plenty more to follow. I mean, legitimately, we could have spoken for hours, as people who love their subject matters might. Now, for a little bit of additional context, conclusions, observations. Firstly, the track tension system remains grease gun in these prototypes. Now, maybe GDLS will move to an automated system, but that has not happened yet. I know people wanted to know. There have already been plenty of comments online. Secondly, to reinforce what both Colonel Howell said and I put out on X, do not get hung up about anything above the turret ring. The vehicle doesn't have APS installed. It doesn't have laser detectors. It doesn't have a lot of stuff. Putting it onto this test vehicle is pointless. It doesn't need it for the job of refining how the crew operates. Similarly, don't get hung up about the Javelin or the other secondary weapons. The fit has not been finalized, and the RWS that they're using for the tests happens to have a Javelin rail. So they stuck a Javelin on it for the show instead of leaving it empty. And it also shows, well, the RWS is configurable. It turns out the folks in Detroit have a fairly similar attitude to mine. If it is a capability which can be launched from or used from another platform, it has no business being on the tank, taking up weight, space, crew attention span, or expense. The tank needs to focus on doing things only the tank can do. They're not trying to make bolos. I'll hit yet again on crew size. As the lad said off camera, people need to distinguish between technical problems and organizational problems. I've covered .mlpf in the past. Any problem can have a solution from any of those categories, and often from multiple categories. Fighting the tank is a technical problem. How many crew do you need to operate the vehicle on the battlefield? And that is the answer for how many people need to be in the tank. How many crew do you need outside the tank to change a track, listen to the radio speaker, sit in an LPOP, and so on? This is an organizational question completely irrelevant to the tank's design. Example. What if the Army did what the Navy does with submarines and assigns 2 rotating crews per vehicle? If M1E3 truly is fully combat capable with 2 people, then the same 16-man tank platoon can operate 4 tanks in a true 24/7 capability, no need for sleep, whilst providing the manpower for the maintenance and support duties, and also only putting half of them in harm's way at any one time. Okay, maybe you want to add a lieutenant and platoon sergeant in there to meet the mission command requirement, making it an 18-man platoon. But is this not a massive increase in combat capability at the cost of having to have the off-duty crews catch up in an ISV or 2 between missions? Now again, this is only an example in extremis. I have absolutely no clue if the Army is looking at such a thing, but it shows how that needed for maintenance type manning argument is totally detached from the tank and can be addressed in ways other than putting a man needed for maintenance into the tank for combat when he's not doing maintenance. There are also technical solutions which will result in fewer maintenance hours required per vehicle, not only in terms of making the equipment itself more reliable, but in the manner in which maintenance operations occur. And I've touched on this in other videos. As for why they need to make the crew reduction in the first place, look at the support requirements for SEP V3 and V4. You can see why a restart in the design was needed. V3 comes in at over 70 tons. You stick trophy on it and you break 75 tons easily. At a plow, you're over 80. You fit a V4 with everything from ARAT and APS to a mine roller and you are over 90 tons, with the resulting issues of bridges, ground pressure, and so on. I mean, there was even a proposal once to make sort of Sherman E9 type extended tracks, however that fits into side skirts. Then there's transportation, and again, you got historical precedent. Remember once I commented in the video how many railway flat cars in the US could take the weight of a 45-ton tank in World War II? Consider how many railway flat cars in Europe can take 75-ton tanks. You stick a trophy onto a V3 with basically the wings on a turret, it no longer fits in railway tunnels. What's the weight capacity of a Jab or Wolverine? And then, when something else gets invented in 5 years and they decide they need to put it onto a tank, the tank's going to get even heavier again. A major reduction in weight is necessary, and if you can figure out how to shave off nearly 20 tons of weight, whilst at the same time making the tank more lethal and survivable without dropping crew size, I suspect GDLS or BAE will be willing to pay you no small amount of money to do it for them. They certainly haven't come up with an alternative option thus far. Another big discussion I've seen is on the concept of an unmanned turret and the need to fight degraded. They need a backup. Well, in the short term, yes. And they're looking at a manual hand crank type spot in the tank. You worm through a blast door, squeeze up and you have a gas, manual hand cranks for aiming, and a crank or something for the autoloader. Although I can also see an independent battery circuit also being an option. By necessity, this space needs to be as small as possible, which allows for that and maintenance tasks, or else you're going to lose the benefits of an unmanned turret. But in the long term, consider the possibility that the crew themselves are the backup option. This is a drive-by-wire, shoot-by-wire tank, which basically means everything they do gets turned into a computer signal and processed by a computer. The motors and capacitors don't care if the signal to turn the turret or fire the gun originates from a finger on a trigger or from a computer program. The tank's operation is software defined. When XM1 was being developed, the crew positions were clearly set. They had a driver. His sole function, and the only thing he was capable of doing from his position pretty much, was driving. They had a gunner, whose main function was to aim the weapons and pull the trigger. The loader, whose main function was to keep the main gun and the coax loaded. Now, as Colonel Howell said, that doesn't really apply anymore. In the short term, sure, it's possible that the crews were split up sort of, okay, you drive, I get to shoot the big gun. And when you're not driving, push a button and you get to shoot the RWS. But in the long term, as one person said, there's an app for that. The vehicle is clearly designed to allow for automation. Now, some parts of automation are easier than others. Sorry gunners, but an automated system is generally going to put steel on target faster than you can. That's really easy, and when it's ready, you just download the gunnery app into the tank. Maybe once in a while something odd happens which requires human input, but it won't require a dedicated gunner. Target scanning and acquisition is also pretty easy to program, and I would expect that to be in the tank from day one. Certainly the public statements in the past indicate that it's going to happen. And that's just a computer going, hey, human operator, you might want to look at this thing on the screen that I've detected, because I can scan 360 degrees continuously even if you don't have 360 degrees up on your screen. It may also be capable of target identification. Again, that's just processing power and database storage. Self-driving is more difficult. Computers have been shown to be capable of driving off-road faster than humans, but not sufficiently reliably so that you want to completely trust the thing. Say 10 years though, that might change. You just download the app. You get the idea. This is why I'm saying that this tank is a generational leap in tank technology, and why people who are focused on the admittedly rather janky looking A1 turret are completely missing the point. Does this mean it's going to be an unmanned tank eventually? Possibly, but that's a long ways off, and the vehicle is needed far sooner. There is one thing that I would expect AI may have difficulty with, and that's imagination and creativity. To be clear, automation is not AI. Gunnery is an automatable process, there's a clear logic flow which can be programmed. But thought processes of, what is happening on the battlefield and what can I do about it, is something which requires intelligence, not automation. And I don't think many people are comfortable with leaving that sort of requirement in the hands of a computer right now. So a human is going to have to be in the loop somewhere. And that somewhere is going to have to be in the tank. Remote operation, even sort of semi-autonomous, is going to be a non-starter for now, I think, due to bandwidth limitations and the possibility of jamming. It would be very embarrassing for your tanks to be hobbled by a good enemy electronic warfare capability. So going back to some of the more short-term issues. Colonel Howell loves powertrains, which is fair enough, as historically it's what makes the difference between a tank and a pillbox. If you look at the transmission layout, you can see that it's a parallel hybrid. There's space for the electric motors. One of the huge advantages to the turbine over diesels like MTU or Perkins is the torque band from start. Fuel efficiency is all well and good, but is it worth losing the get up and go from a turbine? And until now, the answer has been no. Diesel installation has been a proven possibility in M1 for many years, but there is a reason it was never accepted. There is now, however, an alternative, which also provides immediate torque from a standing start, and that's the electric motor. Not only, however, do we have the torque and the fuel efficiency, but there are other possible advantages. If the diesel engine gets knocked out for some reason, there's still presumably an electric motor with batteries to get you out of trouble. It can drive very quietly in silent mode. The system can be configured for different modes of operation. Convoy or route march mode would probably need different power output bands than operation in hills or mud. The computer can instruct the diesel to detune itself, maybe shut down a few cylinders, so that when the tank is sitting idle, it doesn't need a separate APU installed. Yes, they understand that cameras get dirty or broken. The design takes this into account and capability is being verified by testing. Now, on this, it's always possible that a random internet pundit will come up with an issue that they haven't thought of, but give the guys a little bit of credit here. Same with the maintenance issue. They're smart folks, most have a tanker background, and if they do miss something, with or without comments from the peanut gallery, the testing is supposed to find it, which is why we have this test vehicle built now and not the final variant. It will cost way too much money to build a final type turret for the test program, which looks great, has the integrated APS sensors, etc., only to find out in testing that this particular camera protection system doesn't work, or they really should have mounted the thermal viewer 6 inches to the right. I did not ask about the wheel spacing, but there are two possibilities which come to mind. One is that the weight change required the rejiggering and the spacing, but I think the real reason is that the space after the number one road wheel in the original tank was simply needed so that the torsion bars did not go where the driver's seat needed to go. Without torsion bars to interface with the crew compartment on E3, the wheels can be spaced more correctly. I am also told that the apparent lowering of the suspension and idler is an optical illusion caused by higher gases, although I do note that on Challenger the hydrogas units sit a little bit lower until they are warmed up a bit by operation. And to expand on Colonel Howell's comment, why release this now? Well, if nothing else, it makes testing the vehicle easier. Until now, the thing has had to be flown around, maybe transported at night under a tarp to avoid the situation of that T-90 which showed up in Arkansas on a flatbed. If they really want to put the vehicle through its paces, they're going to run the risk of some random private or airman seeing it, putting it up on Reddit and asking, what is this thing? And besides, everybody knew we were working on a new tank anyway. Now it's public, the program is easier for everyone. Now that's not to say that they're going to live stream all the testing or give us a running commentary on how the program is going, although I might have had actually thought to ask for that. But you can see how not keeping it a secret allows the program overall to be faster, more thorough and more efficient. Right, hopefully this all helps the discussion. I hope you found it interesting and informative. And now I need to go see about a new camera.